All right, hey, good morning. Let's talk about the voices that we often hear. All right, so I'm reading through 1 Kings 19, and that first voice we hear is Jezebel's. It says, Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow. About this time, Elijah had just slew 850 Baal priests, and so she was upset. She got word of it, so she began to send threats. And secondly, we hear Elijah speak. Once he heard this, it says, But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree and requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. He had just had this, huge victory, and now he's just ready to die. Not on her terms. He doesn't want her to kill him. He wants the Lord to take his life, but nonetheless, he's in despair. The third voice we hear is the angel of the Lord. He spoke to Elijah twice. The first time he said, Rise up and eat, and Elijah rested again, but the second time, this is what he said. He said, The angel of the Lord came again the second time and touched him and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. He was telling him that this meal is going to have to sustain thee. In fact, Elijah went 40 days on this one meal. I think it was a cruse of water and bread. I'm sorry, I can't even remember exactly what it is. I think it was bread. But the next we hear the voice of the Lord. And he said, Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. So God is having this talk with Elijah now. What are you doing here? Let's talk this out. So he says, Go stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. All right, so he made this big thing happen, but he did not see the Lord in this mighty act that literally broke the rocks. And next it says, After the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. Okay, this great and mighty act, but God was not in it. He's showing that, hey, sometimes these huge things happen. Sometimes these scary things happen. Sometimes these seemingly powerful things happen. Well, it says, And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. Okay, he was not in any of that. And after the fire, a still small voice. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is that still small voice. It says, And it was so, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entering of the cave. And behold, there came a voice unto him and said, What doest thou here, Elijah? So we see these four voices. We see Jezebel's threatening voice. We see Elijah's voice of despair. We see the angel's voice of instruction, and God's voice of power and authority. Yet it was in a still small voice. Now, if you've read the last chapter, he had just come from this huge boldness of calling down fire from heaven, right? He'd gone from this great big victory to fear. So much that we see that he was ready to die. He was ready to die by the threat of Jezebel, even though he had just killed those 850 prophets. And his words were, For I am not better than my fathers. I don't know why he thought he was undeserving suddenly of to have his life spared, or I don't even know exactly what he's thinking. I can't meditate and get into all that this morning, but he was ready to die. And I think oftentimes we are much like Elijah in this aspect, because we'll listen to the voices, those threats of the enemy, and those voices and those thoughts in our mind, those fearful things. That's not what God wants us to listen to, but they're so loud. There's so much power in them sometimes, just like there was power in that mount that was rent, and that wind, and that earthquake, and that fire. Sometimes there seems to be so much power in the things that we're listening to, okay? But God wants us to listen to him and him alone. He has power and authority in his instruction, and he does not have to yell. He does not have to make big things happen. He just has to speak. I want us to take note of something. We read the Bible in such a way sometimes that we think that everything is always up here, and that's not the case. We're not always going to be calling down fire from heaven. We're not always going to be slaying giants. We're not always going to be praying and withholding rain for 3 years at a time. Those were instances we read out. A lot of times, instead of being up here and down here, it's more like right here, and we forget that our life is about a life of faith, a walk with the Lord, and he's in the ups and he's in the downs and he's in the in between, but they're all there. Every bit of it. It's not always going to be mountaintops and valleys. But what we need to remember is that when we see all these things going on, when we hear all these other voices, it does not mean that God is not active. It does not mean that he's not working. It does not mean that he's not present and making provision, because he tells us he's always there. right? We have to believe what his word said. He made us all these promises, and we have to believe it, okay? So God displayed this great deal of power, but he ends it with this still small voice, right? And this voice brought clarity. This voice brought power. This voice hushed all the other voices and solidified that he has all authority. All right. He gave him some instruction and told him what to do. He said, go find Elisha and king of Israel, this prophet, Hazael. He was saying, go anoint this person, go do this, go find Elijah. He was giving him more instruction to go. And so what happens is this is how God ends it. He says, yet, because, Elisha cried out to God and said, oh, it's only me here alone. There are none others. We have no idea what God's doing in the unseen, okay? The spiritual world is pretty much unseen to us, and so we don't know what's going on there. But he says, yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel. Okay, in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him. We got to stop listening to these other voices, listening to the thoughts and feelings that come about based on what we see and what we hear, the circumstances. We need to listen for God, because we cannot assume that he is not present and that he is not active just because we can't hear him over all those voices. We need to hone in. We need to hone in because he often speaks in that still small voice. He speaks with clarity. There's confusion in the other. There's loudness in the other. There's hastiness. There's pushiness. There's God draws. God does not work like all these other things. He is so much greater that we can trust that still small voice, that peacefulness, that calmness, that quietness that comes along when he's speaking to our hearts. And we can't let ourselves get just out of sorts because of it. So sometimes we're not sure what to do. In the meantime, be quiet. Be quiet and just wait and listen. Because God is going to speak again. All right. He wants to talk to us. He might be being quieter than all the other voices, but he wants to talk to us. And the Bible tells us in Psalm 46:10 to be still and know that I am God. He said, I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. He has a perfect time. He has a perfect way. And just because we don't know it doesn't mean it's not present and happening. So be still and wait for that still small voice. All right, be blessed.